Hello, this is Dave Hurwitz, Executive Editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk about recordings of Smetana's Má vlast, My Country, the Czech national work. This is a splendid suite of 6 independent tone poems, which are often played separately, as I'm sure you know, most particularly the Moldau, also known in Czech as Vltava. Now, the Moldau is such a popular piece that a lot of people are surprised to know that it comes from something that's much, much larger. The entire set takes at least an hour and 15 minutes sometimes to play. I'm looking at the Tallich recording here, and let's just see what the timing is. Oh my, it's going to be, let's see, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, plus about 70 minutes. It's quite a heroic piece, a tremendous piece of music. And it presents some very interesting interpretive issues if you're going to do the whole thing. The first of which is that the piece tends to be front-loaded. In other words, all the more popular bits happen up front. The last 2 tone poems, Tabor and Blanik, are related by the use of the Hussite hymn, Ye Who Are Warriors of God, familiar from Dvorak's Overture. You know, it's the one that goes dun 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 bum 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 bum, and that's at least the opening idea there. And they're quite substantial and repetitious, and nobody really likes them so much. It's kind of heretical to say that nobody really likes them, but within the context of the whole work, they're okay. But the other 4 are so colorful and interesting and independently successful that it's kind of difficult to make the case for Tabor and Blanik. So a great performance of the whole bunch has to find a way to integrate those 2 into the cycle as a whole. Usually that means keeping them flowing, keeping the music moving correctly. The other thing is that, the opening has this wonderful bardic cadenza for 2 harps, except that the 2 harps don't show up anywhere else. Everywhere else, Smetana uses 1 harp. The easy way around that, and the way I've seen it done quite frequently, is simply to have both harps play in unison later on, so that the second harpist gets something to do. But that's a bit of an impracticality for the opening tone poem, which is Vyšehrad, the citadel that sits on the Vltava River outside of Prague. And then there's a very interesting orchestral tidbit in the Moldau, which I could talk about if I'm doing that separately, but I might as well mention it here. At the end of the Moldau, as the river, or the Vltava, I should be saying, since we're doing the Czech version of vlast, as the river flows by Vyšehrad, the Vyšehrad theme, which is a sequence of chords, comes back, capped by a sort of trumpet descant. Now, this trumpet descant has never been played correctly in any performance I've ever heard, except for Zell, his single performance of the Moldau, not Vltava. But the rhythm is divided between the 2 trumpets, and they're supposed to cap everything. They're supposed to be on the top, and you're supposed to hear them. Usually they just get drowned out. Even in the Czech performances, you don't hear it done correctly. And what makes it even more difficult is that at the very end, the 2 trumpets are playing a single rising 4-note arpeggio, but broken in half. So it's bum 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 ba, bum 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 ba, bum 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 bum, just like that, in even notes. You would think that's easy, but to make it audible throughout the trumpet's whole range in even notes is incredibly difficult. I mean, I've done the piece several times in concert. I mean, not with great orchestras, but the conductor spent agonies trying to get the trumpet players to coordinate it rhythmically. Usually it comes out like dum bum ba, bum bum ba, or dum bum 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 is supposed to be even rhythm, right? Or it's da-dum ba-da, da-dum ba-da. It's just unbelievable how many things can go wrong with it. And before that, it's even, they're doing something different. They're going da-da, da-dum, ba-ba, ba-bum, ba-ba, ba-ba. All of that has to be one seamless line. And if you want to know what that is supposed to sound like, you've got to listen to George Zell. He is the only one who's gotten it right in the history of Má vlast. which I find absolutely fascinating. But I'm not kidding. I mean, you really will very, very seldom hear it done absolutely correctly. It's just one of those little insider tidbits you should probably know about, and something you can listen for for the climax there, and see if the trumpeters really know what they're doing. It's astonishing. And what's even more astonishing is that none of the Czech performances get it right. I mean, at least on recordings. I'm not saying the players aren't playing, but the way we hear it is not the way it's supposed to sound. But anyway, let's start talking about the recording, shall we? Now, when you're dealing with má vlast, you have to talk about Czech performances by Czech people. And every Czech conductor worth his salt has done it. And the two from actual Czechoslovakia, which is Czech Republic now, but Czechoslovakia then, were Talic and Schirl. Both of them are great. They really are. They're great performances by master conductors with the Czech Philharmonic that has a proprietary ownership of the work, and you really should hear one of them. Now, the Talic is mono, but good mono. It sounds well. This is an earlier mastering, the Talic Gold Series or Talic Edition, whatever Superfund called it. It was yellow. Sounded a bit better. It was cleaned up nicely, and it's certainly worth hearing. And Schirl's, this is the Denon recording from Japan. I find the Denon releases tend to sound a bit cleaner than the more recent Superfund editions. So that's also well worth owning, however you can get it. I mean, they're great performances, majestic and heroic and virile and, nicely contrasted, and you're in business. The other one I want to talk about, which I have on my iPhone and I have a big box over there, is Harnoncourt's. That's one of the great modern recordings, Harnoncourt with the Vienna Philharmonic. That performance really took everybody a bit by storm because Harnoncourt did all of these things that we'd never heard before. But it turns out that when you look and check, he's just doing what Smetana wrote. It's really quite fabulous. I mean, for example, the string fugatos from Bohemia's Woods and Fields. They've never sounded as sort of misty and poetic as Harnoncourt makes them, but this is what Smetana wrote. It's always fascinating to go back to a score and realize that the most remarkable and seemingly revolutionary things are simply literal realizations of the indications that the composer wrote there. That happens all the time, and it's such a wonderful thing because it tells us that these great masterpieces still have secrets to reveal, and you don't have to be perverse or demented to reveal them. You just have to be faithful. And I think that's a lesson we can all learn. And Harnoncourt's má vlast certainly teaches us that. So if you can find it, I mean, it's available. I was looking on Amazon for about $975 for the disc, but you can download it for something like $11 from iTunes. And you'll find ways to get it if you want to hear it. But let's talk about some of the other recordings that have come out recently and not so recently to see which are the best. This is Klaus-Peter Flor with the Malaysian Philharmonic. This is a shockingly exciting performance. I mean, the orchestra is not 100% great. There's like a missing cymbal crash toward the end, but the performance is really, really exciting. I mean, it's a no-holds-barred, beautifully recorded, very, very, very passionate and committed performance from a place you'd never expect to hear it. And so it's definitely worth having. Also worth hearing is Theodor Kuchar on Brilliant Classics. This is with the Janáček Philharmonic. This one really gets going from Sharka on. Sharka is great. The story of Sharka is, she's this Amazon warrior princess who falls in love, and then her Amazonettes wake up and kill all the men, and it's a bloodthirsty, vengeful, wonderful story with a big love scene in the middle. And I turned it into a fabulous skating routine for when I was doing skating routines for Olympic figure skaters in my spare time. It really worked very, very well. But no one wanted to do it for some reason, because bloodthirsty massacres are not the kinds of things that petite little skater ladies feel like skating to. but they should have. Anyway, this set comes with basically all of Smetana's orchestral music, including the early and quite lovely festive symphony, which everybody ignores because it has, Haydn's Emperor's Hymn in it, and so it's not patriotic, whereas Má vlast is super patriotic. But these are very, very exciting performances by a not quite top-notch orchestra conducted by a really top-notch podium master. I mean, Kuchar is exciting, as you all know. I know lots of you have heard some of his Naxos recordings, and they're quite wonderful. Anyway, this is worth considering because you get all the other tone poems and other things that he did besides. More recently, Charles Mackerras with the Czech Philharmonic. Charles Mackerras, as you know, is Czech by adoption. Nobody played Czech music more successfully. He told me that he had a big fight with the Czech Philharmonic's principal trumpeter in doing this series of recordings, this and the Slavonic dances, because the guy was always too loud and didn't want to tone himself down. But in any case, this is a wonderful, idiomatic, and like everything Mackerras does, it's fresh and lively and musical and insightful and just effortlessly idiomatic in everything the man did, and this is no exception. It's a great Má vlast, and it's definitely worth hearing. But I do have two that are my favorites, and one of them I think will surprise you. This one, Pavel Bergland with the Staatskapelle Dresden. Again, it's not, native, authentic Czech, maybe, but it is, like the Mackerras, an incredibly musical, fresh, lively, exciting, dramatic performance, with an orchestra that really has a lot in common with the Czech sound, that Central European sound where things don't all blend and coagulate. At this time particularly, in the 70s and 80s, the Staatskapelle Dresden, of course, was in East Germany, and the German sound that everybody was always oohing and eyeing over was Karajan's Berlin sound. But that was not a sort of generic orchestral sound, however much people wanted to imitate it. That was a Karajan sound. That was his version of what ensemble sonority should be, and that was very string heavy, very rich, very blended. But that's not what the Eastern European German orchestras sounded like. They were much closer to the Czech sound, a much more highly differentiated sonority, lean in texture, transparent. That's what makes, for example, Kempe's Richard Strauss so great, and it's what makes Bergland's Smetana so great, because you hear all of the orchestral sections, and you hear them cooperating in creating this panoramic and kaleidoscopic, coloristic image that Smetana is creating. Also, they have extremely vivid woodwinds. Karajan didn't really like woodwinds. I know he had great woodwind players, but he was always burying them in other textures. But here, no. And Czech music particularly, you got to hear the woodwinds. It's all about the woodwinds. So they sound quite wonderful here. And this is just a terrific performance in every respect. I never tire of listening to it, and it comes close to getting the trumpets right at the end of the Moldau, so worth considering. However, in the Má vlast sweepstakes, as I'm sure you know, being Má vlastians, as I am, we have to deal with Raphael Kubik. Now, Kubik recorded the work 5 times. Let's see if we can get this straight. You ready? Mercury Living Presence in Chicago. Vienna Phil on Decca. DG with Boston. The Bavarian Forces on Orfeo. And lastly, after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of communism in Czechoslovakia, he recorded a live one on Superphone. So that's 5. They're not all equally fine. I think probably the least successful of them is the Orfeo, although none of them are bad, obviously. They couldn't give you a bad Má vlast if his life depended on it. But, the Chicago one is mono. The Vienna one, It has a really exciting Sharka. I mean, Sharka, you want it a blood and thunder piece if you want it to really zip along, and that one really does. But if I had to recommend just one, and one of Kublik's really has to be your reference recording. I mean, the piece, he was in exile from Czechoslovakia for most of his life, and the piece had to mean more to him than for just about any other musician alive. He was personally involved with it on a level that's truly, truly rare for autobiographical and political, and also, I think, musical reasons. I mean, ultimately, they have to be musical reasons, don't they? And his Boston recording on Deutsche Grammophon, for me, is the best. It's certainly the best played of all of them, and that matters. But also, in terms of interpretation, it has a liveliness and consistent level of energy that you find virtually nowhere else. I mean, the Chicago one is probably a little quicker, but this one has a balance to all of its parts. Remember I said at the beginning of this chat, part of the trick is integrating tabor and blahnik into the cycle so that they sound natural and represent the culmination of all that's come before, despite the fact that what's come before has been this riotous panorama of music. And this is the performance that really does it. Nothing is underplayed, not at all. I mean, it's magnificently played. But here he seems to find an extra level of commitment in those last two tone poems that really cements the work as a whole. And so that's why I recommend as my reference the Kublik Boston recording of Ma Vlast. But you got to hear the Czechs do it. I mean, Kublik was Czech, of course, but I mean, the Czechs do it in Czechoslovakia. Bergland is phenomenal. Mackerras is phenomenal. Harnoncourt is a revelation. It's one of those inexhaustible works that hasn't been recorded so many times that we're saturated and think we know it so well that there's nothing new to say. But it still has revelations for all of us in the smallish number of really, really fine recordings that are out there. So that's what I would suggest. Keep on listening, folks. Thank you for watching, and do please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Take care.